In recent years, the United States has listed China as its primary adversary. Continue to provoke China in the fields of politics, economy, and military, including the Taiwan issue, which is China's core interest. Trying to touch China's bottom line. And China's provocation to the United States. Not all as some Western media expect. Driven by domestic nationalism. Tough against the U.S. Rarely even escalated retaliation for U.S. provocations. This is incomprehensible to many Western politicians. As a Chinese, I can only say that the reason for this is that they don't understand China at all. A Chinese scholar who graduated from Oxford University with a major in international relations. An article was recently published in Asia Times, trying to explain to Westerners the Chinese government's response to domestic nationalist sentiment is to take pragmatic action, rather than as described by the Western media, using nationalism as a tool to exaggerate the role of nationalism in China's foreign policy making. The author cites many cases, some of which some Chinese governments quickly took strong countermeasures. During the Kosovo War in 1999, NATO bombing of the Chinese embassy in Yugoslavia, and the Japanese government's nationalization of the Diaoyu Islands in 2012. Both incidents sparked protests in China. There are also some cases the Chinese government did not retaliate. For example, at the beginning of 2023, in the balloon incident hyped by American politicians and media, the Chinese government did not escalate its actions against the United States. Actually, China is different from Western government because Western politicians underestimated two problems. First, the Chinese government is well aware of the irrational side of nationalist sentiment. Being coerced by public opinion may damage China's long-term strategic layout. For example, when the Japanese government nationalized the Diaoyu Islands, there were two backgrounds. One is that the Chinese Coast Guard was still very weak at that time. China's Coast Guard ships are far inferior to Japan's in terms of number and tonnage. China was unable to maintain regular patrols in waters off the Diaoyu Islands. The second is that China was negotiating with Japan and South Korea to establish a Northeast Asian free trade area, and made great progress. Once the three East Asian countries can unite economically, the impact on the economy, technology, and even politics of the United States will be huge. Insightful politicians in Japan and South Korea understand this. Of course, the United States is also very clear. So suddenly there are right-wing politicians in Japan destroying Sino-Japanese relations through the Diaoyu Islands incident. The Comfort Women incident damaged Japan-South Korea relations. From the perspective of China, these things must be the operation of the United States. The result is that the United States won. The idea of a Northeast Asian free trade area could not be reached in the end. There were also many excesses in the Chinese People's Parade to defend the Diaoyu Islands, including incidents of smashing Japanese brand cars and beating the owner. It was quickly caught by the public opinion war in the United States and played up. Create divisions in Chinese society. And the Chinese government is not coerced by domestic nationalist sentiment. All foreign policy at that time was based on rationality. First of all, to appease the people's emotions, prevent destructive events from spreading. At the same time, plan long-term external countermeasures. Here I have to talk about the second point, Chinese culture's understanding of revenge. There is a Chinese proverb, it is not too late for a gentleman to take revenge for 10 years. The West has underestimated the determination and strength of the Chinese government to carry out the so-called retaliation. This sentence can clearly explain why China did not respond violently to certain provocative actions by the United States and Japan. For example, after the Chinese embassy in Yugoslavia was bombed by American bombers in 1999, China immediately started building a strong military. Originally, the Chinese Navy only had offshore defense capabilities, but it has developed rapidly in the following 20 years. The current surface fleet has become the second largest naval force in the world after the U.S. Navy in terms of gross tonnage. The US Navy thought that its naval strength was already invincible in the world, so it changed its strategy from sea to land. The US Navy's heavily built littoral combat ship, the Zumwalt-class destroyer, has become a useless warship. Another example is that after the Diaoyu Islands incident, China's Coast Guard force has also been greatly developed. At present, the number and tonnage of China's Coast Guard ships have far exceeded those of the Japanese Coast Guard. China has firmly controlled the waters around the Diaoyu Islands, and it is difficult for Japanese fishermen and politicians to land on the Diaoyu Islands. After the United States has continuously imposed embargoes and sanctions on Chinese companies in the semiconductor field in recent years, China's countermeasures appear to be insignificant, merely sanctioning Micron and restricting the export of raw materials. But in fact, the Chinese chose the most difficult and time-consuming but most effective way to fight back. This is to develop the domestic semiconductor industry chain, take down all processing equipment and raw materials, and realize the domestic substitution of semiconductor chips. According to online news, our immersion DUV lithography machine will be successfully developed by the end of 2023. This has been able to solve the manufacturing problems of most chips in China. China's domestic semiconductor industry is about to usher in a blowout development. In general, in the face of foreign provocations, the Chinese government's rational long-term response plan is the most effective and beneficial. This is much more effective than taking to the streets to smash Japanese cars or smash American cars. Since decades ago, Palestinian children have been throwing stones at the Israeli military and police all day long in retaliation for Israel's oppression of them. But they are still throwing stones, and their descendants will only be able to throw stones if no other powers intervene. It makes sense for China to be the only four ancient civilizations preserved to this day. China is a very resilient nation. China's provocations by the United States also reflect this resilience. Maybe China's countermeasures will take a long time and may not be successful in the end, but definitely not all countermeasures will fail. Once it works, it will be a complete game changer in a certain field.